for this week's look at Aftermath, the first in the Aftermath trilogy by Chuck Wendig. We are continuing our book club reading of this fabulous novel. Today we're going to pick up at chapter 28. If you are unfamiliar with the series, I highly recommend you click on the thing and it'll take you back to the beginning. But basically we are taking this book a couple of chapters at a time, kind of discussing the inner meanings of the novel, both for the novel itself and for the Star Wars galaxy at large. But with that, let's jump into chapter 28. So 28 kind of jumps all over the place character-wise here. We start with Ada, who is looking for Wedge. So Ada is still ever trying to impress Sloane and still ever trying to kind of make her mark on the galaxy, and she is trying to find Wedge. She figures out that he's been hiding in secret passages, corners him, but Wedge manages to kind of trick her and run off with the map. Wedge is kind of banking on catching people by surprise because he is still pretty weak. He's still Wedge. He still has a lot of years of experience and training. He gets the upper hand on the upcoming officer. Then we go back to our primary crew. We have Jazz, and Jazz is having a lot of thoughts about how she still wants to be a loner, but she's feeling more and more bonded with this crew that she's with at any given moment. She talks about how they're using this crowd, this riot that's forming in the streets as a tool. And she talks about how she uses people. She doesn't have people. She doesn't have friends, she doesn't have a crew. She's trying to justify what she's doing here as using people to an end. So she's using the people of the city to an end in the same way she thinks that she's using her fellow crew members to an end. Ultimately, she is just bonding to them. She just doesn't really want to see it that way right now. Next, Nora and Singer have a conversation. First, Nora is kind of teasing Singer a little bit because Singer's very nervous because Nora's carrying around a crate of thermal detonators and he thinks she's going to get them blown up, but she's kind of cavalierly explaining that, you know, they don't really work that way, they don't really go off when they're jostled, you have to charge them, blah, 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 and they're kind of having this more lighthearted conversation that moves into the more intense, can I trust you conversation. And this is a conversation that I think is so critical to Singer's character, because Nora's asking, you know, how can she trust that he's now an enemy to the Empire? And Singer talks about how he was a loyalty officer. He wasn't a stormtrooper, he wasn't just any other kind of command officer. His job was to hunt down weakness within the Empire, to find who wasn't loyal, even in the tiniest, slightest way. And as it turns out, that's almost everybody, just to varying degrees, and it can be corrected in many different ways. And so Singer is kind of like, you know, I've always been an enemy to the Empire. I've always been an enemy to my own kind, only now I just don't wear their uniform. So much of Singer's character is a deep wound. You know, he carries with him a lot of guilt for things he's done. And he's a younger man. He's not a kid, but you know, this is not a 50, 60-year-old man either. This is somebody who still has quite a long stint of his life ahead of him, who already has a full lifetime's worth of regret, if not more. He's such a funny, witty, sarcastic character, but it's absolutely a wall of defense. He actually will show you inside the wall pretty often, but he plays it off again as telling a cavalier story. And what's kind of interesting is anytime he's kind of explaining who he is to someone else, it also feels like he's explaining who he is to himself. Then we cut away to John Burrell, the member of the Aftermath crew who is not currently in the Aftermath crew yet. He's the lone special forces guy, and he's basically decided he's gonna take the turret that shut everyone down. He has his reasons. I'm not sure they make sense, but that's just kind of John Burrell for you. He just kind of goes and does, and that's really his claim to fame. So now we get to kind of the final send-off before the Aftermath crew actually goes to take the palace on Akiva. And basically what's going on is they're all describing their plan, that they're going to sneak through the underground tunnels that just pocket this entire planet and go underground to an underground entrance into the palace, and that maybe that underground entrance has been walled off, but you know, they're bringing the thermal detonators so that they can blow into the palace. The idea is go into the palace, get the Imperials, find a way out. Timon is suddenly very, very nervous about this. He keeps talking about how the maps he has aren't really correct, that he, even though he has been under the tunnels before, he often has to kind of figure them out because the maps don't line up. That there's a droid factory from the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the CIS. They had a droid factory down there during the Clone Wars. He's afraid to go near it because he claims the factory is haunted. Mostly he's just acting skittish in many different ways. Now, during this exchange, Nora tries to talk to her son and try to convince him why she fought for the rebellion, and tries to have this emotional plea about how stopping the Empire is good for them, for him, for his kids. And she's a little bit dismayed because ultimately they convinced Timon to go, because Jazz is like, if we don't go, we don't get paid. And then he's like, all right, I'm in. And Nora's just a little bit concerned at how cynical and money-oriented her young teen is. And then finally in this chapter, it kind of ends where it began. We see Sloane, and Sloane has found Wedge passed out on the floor in one of the rooms in the palace. Now, at first she thinks maybe he's dead and that they've succeeded in capturing him, but it turns out he is just passed out, and unfortunately for her, he has gotten a message out, presumably to the New Republic. He was able to send out some information about what's going on in the palace. Sloane is aware that they're kind of trapped on world and the New Republic could be coming. And to just kind of add to the tension of the situation, it describes how the windows in the palace are slowly getting sealed in because people are starting to get closer and closer to the palace and maybe riding right up to the walls themselves. And now we get to Interlude 12, which takes place in Theed on Naboo. Here we have two kids. We have Iggs and Streaks, who are part of the Ankle Biter Brigade. The Ankle Biter Brigade is something we heard about in a previous interlude, the one that had Jack in it, the kid that was originally in the very first interlude. Basically, it describes more of what this Ankle Biter Brigade is, which is a group of orphans or kids separated from their families on Coruscant that were helping with a rebellion to take back part of Coruscant. Here we find out these are a group, these specific kids are a part of the Ankle Biter Brigade that helped the rebellion take back Cocoa Town, and Cocoa Town is a part of Coruscant that we see in the prequel trilogy. Effectively what happened is they're from a group of kids that helped the rebellion, and then the rebellion got them off-world to get them adopted into new families. One of these children is really, really excited at this prospect. The other is not excited about this prospect at all. Basically, he lost his parents, and they died. He had seen them die, and he didn't want to go through getting new parents and losing them again. He just wanted to get back to the fight. He wanted to get back to Coruscant. He wanted to get back to the Ankle Biter Brigade, and he wanted to get back to war. So here, again, we see another case of a kid that's been basically permanently scarred by what he's gone through, which is really sad because he has done a heroic thing, but it shows how hard it is to go back from kind of that traumatic experience of doing an honorable thing to kind of adjust to being a kid. And we see one kid who is, in theory, going to do that successfully. She's going to get adopted into a home, and then we see another one who is not adjusting to it well at all. And it's just kind of an interesting side way of seeing the continued story of what's going on in Coruscant. That actually right now Coruscant is under siege by the rebellion. They're trying to take it from the Empire, and that there's this massive, really important battle that we're seeing through little bits and windows, when really we're on Akiva and focusing on that story. And that's something with Aftermath that I really, really like. I really like how we are seeing the grand story, but we're seeing it in these small segments while we're really kind of staying with this smaller story at a much more intimate level. But how that story is eventually in these other books going to kind of get involved with the larger story as a whole. And then Chapter 29. Chapter 29, the group, the Aftermath crew, is in the caves. They're heading there. They kind of get in through Timon's shop. And at first, Jazz and Timon kind of stay back and strike up a new deal. Jazz and Timon are chatting. Basically, Timon is taking with him the crate that he took from Surat, the gangster. He thinks it's a weapon, and Jazz actually helps him get the crate open, and he finds out that it's little information cards, that it's a lot of covert information. It's not actually a weapon. Jazz promises Timon on the down low that they can work out a deal to sell that information, but they're not going to include anyone else in the group. So now the two of them have a dirty little secret that they're working on. Then we kind of start seeing things from other people's perspective. We jump over to Singer's perspective, and Singer's talking about how confined the quarters are, where they're walking, how these caves kind of jut this way and jut that way, and he's kind of reminded of the corridors on a Star Destroyer, except for those were orderly and these are not. But it's kind of funny. He talks about how a Stormtrooper regulation height is actually designed around the efficient height of Star Destroyer hallways, and that's why people might test in or out of being a Stormtrooper based on their height, and it kind of gets into the "aren't you a little short to be a Stormtrooper" joke, but that was kind of a funny little thing. At this point, Singer's also noticing that Timon is behaving a little jittery. He seems to be nervous about something, and he thinks it has to do with the map. And you're kind of left to wonder, is Sindri right? Does Timon have something else up his sleeve, or is Sindri noticing the kind of deal that Timon has struck with Jazz? At this point, Sindri actually goes over to talk to Jazz, somebody he's kind of formed this bond with, to say that he thinks something's up with Timon. It's a bit of an awkward situation. Sindri goes up and is like, Jazz, I need to talk to you about something. And Jazz is like, well, now that you mention it, we should totally hook up after everything. And Sindri's like, wait, what? And Jazz is like, wait, what? Sitting there going, this is awkward, and I didn't see this coming, because frankly, I did not see anything romantic between Jazz and Sindri at all the first time I read this. And then Sindri's like, actually, I'm gay. And you're like, thank God, because that means nothing's gonna happen. It was pretty much how I reacted to that scene. But anyway, long story short, Jazz thought Sindri liked her, and he doesn't because he's gay. And that's fine. And we're just gonna pretend that that sequence never happened again, and we're never gonna speak of it. Because it was really cringe levels of awkward. But Jazz agrees that Timon is probably lying about the map, and it's great. And you're kind of wondering then, does Jazz actually think there's something wrong with the map, or is she covering up the deal she has with Timon? At this point, we go over to Timon, and he and Nora are talking, and he's still acting jittery, and he's still acting weird, but Nora actually gets him to talk to her, and they actually kind of make up a little bit. Timon kind of explains where he's been coming from emotionally, and they actually have this really nice moment. Also, somewhere along this line, Sindri is starting to ask more and more about Bones' programming, and I liked here, basically, Bones' programming is a mix of combat videos, dance, martial arts videos, which I assume is something like the space equivalent of Bruce Lee movies, and information on a, quote, some cyborg general from the Clone Wars. So presumably there's a little bit of General Grievous inside of Bones as well. At this point, Sindri really wants to know what Timon's secret is, so he kind of runs up and tries to goad him, tries to get him to talk, and he realizes that Tim is really nervous about being around this droid factory. So what he thinks Timon is lying about with the map is Timon made a point of saying how the maps are incorrect, except for the map hasn't been incorrect once since they've been under the caves. So now Sindri thinks that Timon is hiding like a stash or something. So to kind of get Timon to loosen up a little bit, Sindri picks up a rock and chucks it at the haunted droid factory as they walk by, and then a bunch of weird noises come out of the haunted droid factory, and they have to run away because, quote, something woke up. And that's where we're going to leave this video. That's where we're going to get to the end of it this week. For next week, we're going to read chapters 30 through 32. So if I'm not mistaken, that's 30, 31, an interlude on Tatooine, and 32. So that's what we're going to discuss next week. Please leave me a comment on your thoughts on the story so far. I'm always happy to talk to you guys. If you're not already, follow us on Twitter at PortHaven Forums. Visit port-haven.com for even more. And we will continue this next week.